everyone, and welcome again to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Children in foster care are children who have often been abused and neglected, sometimes by their parents or other relatives. And here in Dauphin County in Pennsylvania, where I live, in any given month, more than 400 children live in foster care, and usually the only voice they have in the legal system is an attorney or a guardian. But now Dauphin County has a court-appointed special advocate, or CASA program. CASAs are specially trained volunteers that are appointed by a judge to focus on individual children or sibling groups and advocate in the legal system solely for the best interests of the children. There are CASA programs across the country, and here to talk about them is one of the founders of Dauphin County's CASA program, attorney and judge Lori Serratelli. Lori, welcome to the Musical Innertube.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on.
Laura, let's talk, first of all, about the foster care program. It seems, as long as I've been doing news on radio and television, we've had complaints about the foster care system, not just here in Pennsylvania, but nationwide. Why are there complaints, and why are we always talking about it?
I think the problem with foster care is the initial trauma of the concept to the child who is being separated from a parent who may be neglecting or abusing them, but they are still very closely bonded to that person. I think part of the problem is that they are dealing with children to which they may not be culturally identical. They may not understand some of the issues involved with the children who come from homes where there may have been sexual abuse, drug addiction, alcohol addiction. That takes a very special, caring person to be able to take on those issues, especially if they have children themselves or they are fostering multiple children. That's where the problems can start, matching up the child to the right family. Where the CASA volunteer comes into play and is so necessary when you have children in foster care is they can easily get lost in that system. They are typically appointed a guardian ad litem by the dependency judge, but that guardian ad litem, which means guardian during the pendency of the case, has typically in Dauphin County about 90 children on their caseload, so that they are lucky if they can see a child once a month, if that frequently. And with COVID, it's been even more difficult. The CASA volunteer is assigned one child or one sibling group, which makes a world of difference. That CASA volunteer is dedicated to that child. And the child knows, and the foster parents know, and the biological parents know that the CASA is not part of the system per se. They are not part of the children and youth system. And the biological parent certainly has a fear of children and youth. That is the agency that took their children away from them. The foster parent may also be suspicious with caseworkers coming to check on them. But I have found when I was trained as a CASA myself that CASAs are welcomed into that home much easier than a representative of an agency. So that the trust factor opens up and the CASA can meet with the foster parents at least once a month, more frequently, talk to them on the telephone, meet with the child's teachers, mental health therapists, and make sure that issues in that foster home, if there are any, are being caught quickly. There aren't enough foster parents, actually, to serve all the children that we have needing one. Sometimes the children are so difficult to place because of their own mental health issues, especially the children who've been sexually abused, that they may have to go to a residential treatment center, which is its own issue in terms of making sure that the children are being watched and carefully monitored.
It seems to me that children who come into foster care programs in general, this issue of their mental state is so well. It's paramount in a lot of states. I know some of my friends who work in the foster care programs in Los Angeles County
Mm-hmm.
could say the exact same thing you just said, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this is a
Yes.
population of people who have been through it,
Right.
and this is how they come to the program. I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that, because it's so heartbreaking to think about this. It's not only that there's so many children you have to, and not enough people who can
Mm-hmm.
foster them, but that these are children who've come through a particular kind of very hard life already.
Yes, and that is what's often difficult for the foster parent to grasp, because you have absolutely well-intentioned people. I know wonderful foster parents who often take children on emergency basis for a long weekend where the child has been so battered or sexually abused that they had to be immediately removed from the home. Those are special people. The children often do not stay with the emergency foster parent for a long period of time, but it's just to protect them for that period until they can be placed properly. Um, Dauphin County, and I know probably most of the counties in Pennsylvania, follow a policy right now called kinship care, where the first thing they will do is try to find a relative, try to keep that child in at least some familiar support group, whether it's a grandparent, an aunt, uncle, older cousin. The problem with that is sometimes they may be related, but it does not mean they are the best fit for the child. We all have relatives that we don't see frequently, and just because we may share the same DNA does not mean that kinship care person is the right parent. But they do make that effort to try and keep children within a group they're familiar with, as opposed to a complete stranger in a foster setting. Dauphin County is a very diverse county. We have a rural section, suburban, city. So there are at least 3 different experiences that children have in this county. And the rural children can be lost in the mix just because homes are far apart. You don't have the neighbors noticing and maybe reporting suspicious activity. The urban setting has its own problems. And I won't say that drugs are certainly only in the city. They are rampant throughout the county. But you're in a much more concentrated area in the urban setting. And the suburbs also have their issues with addiction, whether it's alcohol, mental health, or any sexual abuse is just horrific as well. I think that is, to me, the most horrific form of child abuse. And those children at such a young age have now become sexualized, and that they are the most difficult child to place in a foster setting. They think it's normal. They think that's normal behavior, and that's got to be unlearned.
If I want to be a foster parent,
Mm-hmm.
you have to give me a complete dossier on the children, right? I have to know their entire history, correct?
They do not, believe it or not, have as much access as a CASA does.
Mm-hmm.
A CASA volunteer is given an order by the court, by the judge they are reporting to, that authorizes them to speak to anyone involved in that child's treatment, whether it's a doctor, psychologist, teacher. Foster parents don't quite have the same rights to access, but I will say when they are recruited, they're certainly going to be matched by the foster care agency, who extremely vets the individuals who are applying to be a foster parent. So that matchup, I think, occurs more by the caseworker. But certainly the foster parent can reject an offer to foster a child they don't think they're able to handle.
Some of the numbers here seem pretty high. I mean, when we're talking about more than 400 kids just in Dauphin County alone that are in foster care, how many CASA volunteers are there if they concentrate on one kid?
Mm-hmm.
obviously there needs to be 400 volunteers just to take care of the kids that are in foster care. How is it selected that a CASA volunteer gets matched up with a foster child?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And let me just say, we are a new program. We actually began functioning in July of 2019. We have currently 16 trained volunteers. We have been able to serve close to 30 children with our 2 classes of volunteers. And that's because we have been assigned 2 cases that are very difficult with large sibling groups, believe it or not, of 8 to 10 children in one family. So we have assigned 2 CASAs in those large sibling group cases. Under the national CASA guidelines, one employee of a CASA program can supervise up to 30 volunteers, and that's a big load. They try to keep it more 20 to 25 per employee. So you can see that we, in our newly founded program, we're already up to, we're getting close to a maximum. In another probably training session, our executive director will be maxed out in the number of volunteers that she can supervise. So it's very important for these programs to keep growing. So the executive director is the one who often sits in the dependency court listening to the various cases coming before the court, and will reach out to the judge and suggest that this would be a perfect case for a CASA. Not every dependency case needs one. There are children who do well. They are kept in kinship care, living with their grandparents, and things go smoothly. The other cases where there is some severe mental health or abuse, those are the ones where CASAs, if appointed early on in the case, can make a huge difference. They are tasked by the judge with collecting information. I wouldn't say we're spies, but we are we're certainly investigators into everything that's going on in that child's life. The whole concept of CASA started in 1976 in Seattle, Washington, by a judge who felt he just did not have enough information. He had a little 3-year-old come before him, and the caseworker didn't have the time. They had such a large caseload of cases. He needed someone to help him, and that's when he developed the CASA concept. And it's grown to the point where there are over 950 programs throughout the country. We have 21 programs throughout Pennsylvania serving 27 counties. The largest would be like York, Philadelphia County, Allegheny County, some of the bigger cities, and they have large staff.
I think that in a lot of cases, when you're trying to find out information about a child, you may run into a lot of situations where folks really aren't very eager to share that information. If
Absolutely,
it must be a really, in some cases, a detective, almost a detective story to get the story right.
Yes, I think that's an excellent analogy. We are detectives, and I can tell you that from personal experience. I felt before I could start a program in Dauphin County, I needed to be a CASA myself. And I trained in Cumberland County, which was the closest county to Dauphin, in an excellent program that's been in operation for over 20 years. And I handled, because I was an attorney, they decided I could handle the more difficult cases. So I had the opportunity to see some horrific situations where biological parents were in jail or in treatment programs. And you're correct, the biological parents are not forthcoming with the information. And consequently, sometimes the foster parents don't have enough information. So you have to go to the schools, you have to go to other relatives, to the therapists who may start finding out information about the child that you can then relate to the judge.
And it's okay for them, and it's okay for the therapist to inform you about that?
Because we have the court order, yes, they are mandated to give us that information. CASAs actually have more authority than even the caseworkers and the guardians ad litem.
There are so many variables that go into this. You have a child that could have some mental problems. You have foster parents who are trying to be good, but maybe have their own families that are
Right.
trying to, adapt the
Mm-hmm.
foster child into that whole situation. You have the judges, you have the lawyers. So there's a lot of tentacles going on at the same time here. What
Mm-hmm.
does a CASA volunteer do to cut through all that? And what powers do they have to make sure that kid is treated well and gets the help that he or she needs?
Mm-hmm. It really starts with the judge, and programs, any CASA program cannot even begin without the buy-in of the court. The dependency judges love the idea of having a CASA that they can go to, and it's reciprocal. The CASA can go to the judge if the CASA needs help. The dependency system is not that old a system. There was a time where children were property and no one was really protecting them. So maybe we have a 40, 50-year history of states, counties actually enacting these laws to protect children. I know one judge, Judge Guido in Cumberland County, has often said that animal cruelty is regarded more horrifically by people than cruelty to children sometimes. And that's sad. Caseworkers, unfortunately, in every county are not paid enough for the work they do. It's a very emotionally draining type of work.
Yes.
So there's a lot of turnover. And that's something that a child in the foster system will see, that they may have a different caseworker every 3 months. The CASA volunteer must pledge when they take on a case that they are going to stay with that case for a year and a half, 2 years, which is the typical period of time a child is supposed to be in dependency. The goal of CASA, the goal of the dependency court, is to either return the children to their biological parents after the parents have received services, to hopefully help them. Many parents are not evil, abusive parents. Often the problem comes from sheer poverty, and that's where the neglect cases come from, where the parents don't have the money, don't have the means to take care of the children. So you don't see the horrific ones that you see in the paper as the average case. I would say most of them are poverty or mental health or addiction related. So the goal, within 15 to 22 months, that child should either be returned to their parents out of the foster home, or the biological parents' rights will be terminated by the courts so they can move to adoption. And in the CASA world, we call that finding your forever home. That's what we try to make happen.
Is there a way you could tell us who these people who are CASAs are? Can you give us a profile of the kind of person who joins the program? Because, well, I mean, it sounds very challenging and very committed and very skilled. So what do they tend to, what backgrounds do they tend to have, if any? Can you tell us what kinds of people work in that position?
Sure. And first of all, it depends on the program, who they're trying to recruit, because we do try to be culturally sensitive, and often children, at least in Dauphin County, we have a high number of children who are Hispanic, African American, and we are always trying to recruit volunteers that the child will feel comfortable and identify with. Our first class of CASA volunteers we trained in October 2019 was a very varied group. Because there is so much time that you must devote to this. This is not your typical charity work where you may just work at a food bank for a couple of hours a month. This is, you are taking on a commitment. So often you will find retired people who have finished their career and want to give back to the community. So there were a good number of retired individuals, but they all came from different walks of life. Some were We have one man who's a business person all his life. We have a nurse. We have a woman who is a probation officer. We have another young woman who's still working, who had worked in adult protective services and now wanted to use her skills to help children. Nurses, law students. I don't know how the law students can do it, because just being in law in law school is hard enough. But
I was just going to say, when did they find the time, to do it?
I know.
You know.
Yeah, I know. We even had a law professor train. So we have a very varied group in Dauphin County, and I'm sure York County, Philadelphia County, Allegheny County does the same type of recruitment. But you will see the majority of CASAs are retired. They do tend to be female. We are trying to make an effort to find more male CASA volunteers, because we need all types of people to work in this system.
I was also thinking that folks would hear this and think, well, they must all have law degrees or be social science majors or something. And then I thought, well, maybe not. So it's interesting. It's such a diversity. Mm-hmm. And I love this idea that you're trying to get men to work in it, because, as you know better than I do, the social services are really, especially the caring professions, are so heavily female. And that's not a bad thing, but obviously diversity helps us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will, if I could add, that our Dauphin County CASA program is a pilot program, in that we are also taking assignments for children who are duly adjudicated. And what that means is they've come into dependency, and usually in their later adolescent teen years get into some trouble at school, or they now have a juvenile involvement. So not typically having a guardian ad litem. They don't have a guardian assigned to them. They're often standing there in front of the court alone, which is hard to watch. So we are trying to also help the children with that dual adjudication.
What do we consider a successful outcome when a CASA volunteer goes in? You said returning children to their families is the ultimate outcome, but what do we have short term as far as what's considered successful for a CASA volunteer to get in there and really get things moving in the right direction?
Sure. As you know, it all depends on the case, but just thinking back to the cases I handled, the most successful is if you're assigned early on, and some of the children are not necessarily taken out of the home of their biological parents, depending on the severity of the issues. There is a service plan that's written up quickly, where the parents who may have been neglecting or appearing to be abusive toward the children are put into programs to learn how to parent. And sometimes that's what the problem is. They are young parents. They've had a bad example themselves, and they just didn't mean for things to turn out the way they did with their children. So one of my successful cases, when I was involved in that early on, I was able to make sure everyone attended. And attending your appointments is not always easy if you don't have a car and you're poor. You don't have a cell phone. No one's helping you. So just kind of being there to remind people and make sure everyone's getting to their appointments. If they complete their service plan, they can have their case closed, and that will be the end of it, and the family lives happily ever after. That happens occasionally. If you have the cases where the children have moved into foster care, the biological parents are given the same type of service plan, and they are given 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opportunities. It's not just one chance to complete the plan and try to correct their problems. If they don't do that within the year, the 15 months, the 22 months, then the CASA is going to be gathering information, making recommendations to the judge. And I remember fighting once very hard for a biological mother. She was really trying to make progress. And the judge listened to me, gave her one more chance. And sadly, she went right back to her bad ways. And we all learned, Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and you have to think about what's best for the child. So at that point, the parental rights were terminated and the child moved to adoption. So I may have delayed that a little bit, but I did think that the natural parent had the right before the termination occurred to make one more chance to become a better parent.
Let's talk fantasy world here for a second, Lori. Let's say that you're in charge of the foster care program, and whatever you do, whatever you think you need to do to make it better and work better will happen. What sort of things would you do to make this a better situation for everybody, for the parents, for the kids, and the judges and everybody involved in it?
I do think that the foster parents, from what I've heard, need to be more involved because they are kind of kept in the dark as to what's going on. And that's because the biological parents are the ones who have the rights legally to their child. So it's probably going to take amendments to statutes for that to change. And that is something that the legislature can look into. Certainly, anyone concerned about the foster system can write to their legislature and ask for reforms in the foster system. I think if the foster parents are more involved and don't feel that they're second class, that might correct some of the problems. Other than that, I think the CASA is the bridge between the dependency system, the court, and the foster parents. So I would keep working as hard as I can. And that means raising a lot of money because most CASA programs are nonprofit charities. We have 3 in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that are funded by the county, but the rest of us all have to raise funds to pay our staff. And you can't grow your staff unless you have the funds. So my wish there would be that Pennsylvania could join the ranks of the rest of the country, where most states do fund their CASA programs. And that allows the local programs to just focus on their work and not spend half their time fundraising. So that's my fantasy.
Children and Youth Services is also, you've mentioned them a couple of times. How are they involved in this? I know that's sort of like the, how can I put this nicely? I don't want to say Gestapo of the whole thing, but they're basically the people that come in and make the decision to remove the child. Is that correct?
They collect the information through the caseworker. The judge ultimately will order based on the information given from children and youth. But you're right. The community does have that perception of children and youth. and
now Children and Youth is a state-run agency.
Yes,
that is supposed to watch over the good and bad of children across the Commonwealth.
That's correct. The county administers it, but you're right. The state, the Commonwealth, establishes the rules and regulations. Dauphin County's had a rough history. Another reason why I believed we needed to have a CASA program. There was a horrific case in 2014, I believe, where a child was in dependency, had caseworkers, and the caseworker, because of perhaps inexperience, did not always look at it was a young infant, and that child actually died from starvation.
Oh God!
It was horrific. But what happened is that Children and Youth went on a provisional license. Many people were terminated from their positions. They brought in a wonderful new executive director to turn things around. But when I saw that happening, I said, oh my goodness, if there had been a CASA, CASAs go into the home, CASAs make sure they see the child, that would not have happened. So that was the turning point for me to not give up, because there were times I thought this was an uphill battle. But that case just absolutely energized me to make sure the program came to Dauphin County.
You talked about judges having final say.
Mm-hmm.
How well are they accepting and integrating CASA into the system?
It was initially a struggle. And the way we integrate, when I was first starting the program, and that started in 2016, we worked for over a year on something called a Memorandum of Understanding. So the court, children and youth, CASA, and juvenile probation wrote up a contract of how we were going to interact with each other and how referrals would be made. So referrals can come from the guardian ad litem, they can come from the caseworkers, they can come directly from the court or juvenile probation. So that was important to establish how the referrals were going to be coming through. We have been working, we have a good working relationship. I think after the first year with children and youth, we are now at the point where we're going to have biweekly meetings. We meet with the director. All this is happening virtually, unfortunately, by
Right.
Zoom. But we meet with the the director of children and youth and the solicitor, try to keep open the doors of communication, because it's very important that the CASA volunteers are respected by the caseworkers, because there needs to be sharing of information on the cases affecting the children. And we try to explain to the caseworkers that we're there for you too. If we find out information about the child, we're giving it to you, because you, caseworker, don't have the time to get out there with your 50 other cases. So we should all be helping each other, and it's taken a good year or so for that to be integrated into the understanding of the various stakeholders in the system. But I think we're getting there.
And if somebody wants to look into the program, wants more information, maybe wants to be a CASA worker, where do they go and what do they do?
Sure. We have a website, as all good organizations do. It's dauphincountykasa.org. That's for the local program. You can find information on the PACASA.org website. And above that, there is the National CASA website. Excuse me. You can just Google those names and the websites will pop up. There is an amazing working relationship between PA CASA and the local programs. They supervise us. They make sure that we have quality assurance, that we abide by all the credentials that are required by the National CASA. So it's a very professionally run program. And we try to share the same marketing logo so we can be identified. But if you go to the website, there is a contact page if you're interested in being a volunteer. What we try to do is hold orientation sessions periodically, and that's to explain exactly what the commitment is of a CASA. Some people determine they don't have the time to do it, or they may not quite understand what the CASA's role is. So the orientation, I think, is important. Once they get past the orientation and they decide they'd like to volunteer, we do a very thorough interview to make sure everyone's background is clean. We require clearances. We require that your motivation is pure, that you are there to help the child and you have no hidden agenda in what you're doing. Once you go through that and you are accepted into the program, you will go through a almost 30-hour training. The training is thorough. It goes through the law, so you understand the dependency court system. It goes through all these social services. It goes through understanding cultural differences. It's an amazing training program that's put together by National CASA and is required for every local program to use with their volunteers. After you complete your training, then you will be assigned to a child. The judge will actually issue an order assigning you, and that will happen after one of those referral sources determine that a child needs a CASA. There is a nice swearing-in ceremony. After that, you are committed to continue 12 hours of continuing education, and that is done by each local program with lectures and books to read and so on. So it's a constant continuation of training.
And one last question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you optimistic about the fact that CASA is going to be a success story, that by injecting CASA into this whole system, you're going to come up with much better results?
Absolutely. I would not have invested the past almost 10 years now of my life if I didn't believe in this. Having a CASA affects a child in such dramatic ways. Usually they spend less time in dependency, that they get out of the foster care system. They tend to have increased chance of graduating high school, go on to college or vocational school. They tend not to become homeless. So with the right CASA, making sure that that child keeps moving along, and with the right foster parents too, of course, they will not be homeless. They will not wind up incarcerated if they have the CASA going through this whole system with them from day one till the end. And I have seen children that you would never have expected going to college. That's how old I am. And having worked in the CASA system for quite some time now, I've seen the young ones actually graduate high school, move on to college, be married, have children of their own, and have productive lives. And that makes society better.
Well, thank you very much, Lori, for talking with us today. It sounds like it's going to do a lot of good. So thanks very much for talking with us today.
Really great.
Thanks for listening. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube. If you'd like to get in touch with us, the email address is musicalinnertube@gmail.com. On Twitter, John is @JTimpain and Don is @DonRooney9. Our webpage is musicalinnertube, that's musical spelled with 2 A's, .libsyn, spelled LIBSYN.com. The Innertube is now available on Amazon Music. If you're a member of Amazon Prime or are subscribed to Amazon Music, just type Musical Innertube in the search box, and there we are. We're also available on Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio Podcasts. Like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms. And don't let Halloween pass you by without listening to the fine productions of the Musical Innertube Players. Head over to musicalinnertubeplayers.libsyn.com for almost spooky stories and the Werepig of London. And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.